Lesson 66, and this morning I am talking about economic growth. Now, in many ways, I think you probably guessed by now, the way in which you achieve economic growth in an economy is to have aggregate supply growing in line with aggregate demand, and then you also have a zero output gap, and hey presto, we're going to get economic growth. It's not really as simple as that. There needs to be lots of different factors in place for an economy to achieve economic growth. But as regards an A2 essay, that's a really good starting point to have. However, I believe you can always say when you're writing the essay is, okay, this is how you achieve economic growth. AS grows in line with AD. That's quite a good start. But let's have a look at 1997, between 1997 and 2007. And during this period of time, we did have economic growth of roughly 3% a year, which was really good. But it was based upon consumer debt, government debt, and also trade debt. At the time, the IMF, as I previously said we'd achieved macro stability and that we were the top nation out of all the developed countries in the world in terms of that. But in fact, it was built upon these three things on here. Of course, we could also suffer, economies do suffer from supply side shocks that we've already looked at in lesson 61, and also demand side shocks. And economic growth is dependent on how well you also deal with those shocks. A demand side shock is probably easier to deal with because we can either print money or lower interest rates to increase demand. And we also, fundamentally, we can't just increase aggregate demand willy-nilly, because what's going to happen is aggregate demand is going to get bigger and bigger. If the long run aggregate supply curve does not shift outwards, then we're always going to end up with demand pull inflation. So fundamentally, you always must have supply side economics. So therefore, the AS curve can move out to there. Okay. Let's talk very quickly about supply side again. So you can talk about decrease in corporation tax is now 21%, increase in investments, increase the long run aggregate supply curve. It will also increase AD because AD is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. You use the multiple accelerator and we're going to get economic growth. And it also conforms to the Laffer curve, whereby if you decrease taxation, you're going to get more revenue back. But pretty important also is labour market flexibility, whereabouts if you introduce 0-hour contracts, increase the flexibility of the labour market, reduce the power of the trade unions, better train for workers, raise the tax threshold, all of those things will create a more flexible labour market, and therefore the economy will be able to run at high levels of demand, because once again we'll be able to shift out the aggregate supply curve. Also pretty important to all of that is intervention supply side. And if we build more roads, more rail, better broadband, more airports, all of these things will shift out the aggregate supply curve on here. So we've got a nice bit of essay in here, very quickly. We can provide some comments here. Decreasing corporation tax fits in with the Laffer curve. If you increase labour market flexibility, you're increasing opportunities for workers on an individual level, but also at the same time, say with something like 0-hour contracts, you may actually be reducing their income, so it creates a greater inequality of income. And it's quite easy to do with on the demand side. We can also increase AD either through monetary policy, lower interest rates, the transmission mechanism, or we can use fiscal policy, lower taxes, and then we can also bring the Laffer curve again. So we've really got quite a nice essay. But why is it that some countries do really well recently and some countries not so well? Well, previously I've spoken about China. China saves enormous sums of money, and because it saves enormous sums of money, then that allows the Chinese economy to also take loads and loads of investment, and if you don't take loads of investment, you're going to shift out that AS curve. But however, the Asian economy is now decoupling itself from the European and the American economy. What does that mean is they're now creating their own demand within their own economies. So in their economies now, consumption is rising. Previously, we've always relied on America to buy up all the goods that the rest of the world produces, right? So they go down to Walmart, they buy all the cheap Chinese goods, or they buy all of the Korean goods. And also Europe's pretty large as well, so they've got 500 million people in Europe. They also have a high standard of living, so they also buy up their own goods. The change around in the Asian economies is that they're now creating their own demand, so they're buying up their own goods. But South Korea wasn't really doing particularly well previously. In 1997, we had a financial crisis in the Asian community, which meant that the West, as it were, pulled all their money out of Asia, And then also Asia suffered during the 2008 crisis in America and Europe because we stopped buying so many goods. So, but as I just previously said, Asia now creates its own demand. But in particular, the reason why South Korea has performed so well is because it spends 3.5% on their GDP on research and development, e.g. Samsung. Now, therefore, they produce new goods, therefore they find out new ways of doing things. Hyundai cars, these cars are very reliable, they do a lot of miles to the gallon, etc. So that's really why these economies have taken off. Politically, they become much more open to outside influences. The more you become open to outside influences, the more that you'll be able to compete. So the classic example of that is North Korea, which has completely shut itself off from the rest of the world. So therefore there's no new ideas coming in, there's no new competition coming in, and therefore it's a very backward country. South Korea is the complete opposite. It's now open. It's open to ideas. It's open to innovation. So we're talking here about an open society and an open culture. We're coming on to there to companies like Samsung. It's open to ideas, incredibly successful, but they've also got the right infrastructure in there. They've now got a good banking system. We're still unsure about our own banking system. Does it really work in terms of running the right sort of businesses? Infrastructure is really, really good. The UK at this moment in time is involved in this experiment of expansionary fiscal contraction, whereby it's decreasing G. By decreasing G, it's giving greater opportunities for the private sector to grow. The private sector is now growing, and that is really the UK's great hope. And lastly, as you see through all these videos, I wear this self-help t-shirt, and the self-help is really, it's got Self-Help Africa on, but it could be self-help for any individual. And the idea there is that you can go out and you've got to help yourself. So every time I talk to my students, I say it's your job to go out there and make the difference. Don't rely on other people to do that for you. It's going to be hard work, but the harder you work, the greater your opportunities, and you can actually go and innovate and create something on an individual level. And of course, as soon as you start innovating on an individual level, you're creating new ideas, you're bringing new things to the marketplace, so it actually creates a more content individual. Okay, so on an individual level we've looked at, but also on a macro level, how do you achieve economic growth? Okay, very, very simply, you increase AS and AD, but you can be sure along the way there's going to be all these supply side shocks are going to take place and these demand side shocks. However, if you have really, really good supply side policies, you're going to be okay. If there is a demand side shock, then we become much better in terms of our economies, of decreasing interest rates and lowering taxes to increase demand. Don't be fooled just because your economy is doing well. This period of time, 1997 to 2007, with consumer debt, trade debt, government debt, that situation was always going to blow up at some stage. And then in 2008, we really got a demand side shock, the credit crunch. At the same time, we also got a supply side shock because the price of oil suddenly went up to $147 per barrel. Okay, so how do we make ourselves immune from all of this? Well, let's have a look at the Asian continent, because they've done remarkably well over the last 20 to 30 odd years. They've created the right sorts of policies. They're open to culture, they're open to innovation, and they've just done, they've achieved high rates of growth. So that's the reason why those economies have done particularly well. But remember also on here, we've got to get the institutional factors right. And the UK is involved in this experiment called expansionary financial contraction. Lastly, go out there and help yourselves. If the economy does that and it creates that at the individual level, microeconomic incentives to achieve macro goals, then you're going to have a successful economy which achieves high rates of growth. We have a lot to learn in the UK, in Europe, from the Asian economies and how they've gone about things. It doesn't mean we need to copy them, but we can adopt some of their ideas to create a more successful economy.